I never expected to find what I found in that safe. I was just a cleaner, a man in his mid-50s trying to survive after my wife of 30 years walked out on me for a younger man. She had taken almost everything: the house, the savings, the life we had built together. I was left with nothing but a beat-up truck, a mountain of debt, and a job that required me to scrub other people's floors while they lived lives of luxury I could only dream about. I had been cleaning houses for 15 years, ever since my children were small, working for people who barely looked at me, let alone spoke to me. I was invisible to them, just another faceless worker who came and went while they went about their lives of privilege and comfort. But that day, in that mansion, I became the most visible person in the entire city. I became the person who uncovered a secret so dark, so devastating, that it made a billionaire call the police on his own son. My name is Frank, and this is the story of how I cleaned a billionaire's mansion and found something that destroyed an entire family. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was finishing up a job at a small apartment downtown, scrubbing a stove that hadn't been cleaned in months, when my phone buzzed. It was my agency, the company that sent me to different houses every day, and they told me they had a special request. A billionaire had called, they said. He needed someone to clean his mansion immediately, and he was willing to pay triple my usual rate. I almost dropped the phone. Triple my rate meant I could pay off the credit card debt that had been hanging over my head for years. It meant I could finally afford to fix my truck, the one that had been making that terrible grinding noise every time I turned left. It meant I could breathe for the first time in years. I accepted the job without hesitation. I didn't ask questions. I didn't think about what kind of person would need a cleaner on such short notice. I just took the address, packed my supplies, and drove across the city to the wealthiest neighborhood I had ever seen. The houses were massive, sprawling estates with perfectly manicured lawns and gates that required security codes just to enter. I felt out of place the moment I pulled up to the mansion. My truck, a beat-up Ford with a dented bumper and a cracked windshield, looked like a toy next to the luxury vehicles parked in the driveway. There were 3 of them, all European, all gleaming in the afternoon sun. I parked on the street, gathered my supplies, and walked up to the front door. It was an enormous oak door, carved with intricate designs that must have cost more than I made in a year. I rang the bell and waited, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. A man opened the door. He was tall, handsome, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He looked to be in his early 50s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. He smiled, a warm smile that made me feel slightly more at ease, and extended his hand. "You must be Frank," he said. "I'm Charles Worthington. Thank you for coming on such short notice." I shook his hand, surprised by how firm his grip was, and told him it was my pleasure. He led me inside, and I tried not to stare at the opulence surrounding me. The foyer alone was bigger than my entire apartment, with a crystal chandelier that sparkled like 1,000 diamonds and a staircase that curved elegantly up to the second floor. The walls were lined with paintings, original works by artists I had only ever seen in museums. The floors were marble, polished to a mirror shine that reflected my worn-out boots with brutal clarity. Charles Worthington led me to the kitchen, a massive space with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a center island that could comfortably seat 12 people. He explained that he needed the entire house cleaned, every single room, from top to bottom. His regular staff had called in sick, and he was hosting a dinner party for some very important business associates the following evening. He told me to take my time, to make sure everything was perfect, and that he would be in his study if I needed anything. He left me alone in that enormous house, and I got to work. I started with the kitchen, scrubbing every surface, wiping down every cabinet, polishing every stainless steel appliance until it gleamed. I worked methodically, room by room, losing myself in the rhythm of the work. Cleaning was the one thing I was good at, the one thing that made sense to me. When you clean, you see immediate results. You transform chaos into order. You make things beautiful again. It was therapeutic in a way, a temporary escape from the mess of my own life. I moved through the mansion like a ghost, invisible and silent, leaving nothing but cleanliness in my wake. The hours passed quickly, and I barely noticed the time slipping away. I was in a zone, focusing on nothing but the task at hand, when I noticed something strange about the house. It was too quiet. There was no sound of a television, no music playing, no voices. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I shook off the feeling and continued working, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. By the time I reached the second floor, my back was aching and my hands were raw from scrubbing. I had been working for hours, and I still had half the house left to clean. I took a brief break in the hallway, leaning against the wall and drinking from my water bottle, when I noticed a door at the end of the corridor. It was different from the other doors. It was made of solid oak, like the front door, and it had a heavy brass lock that looked like it required a key to open. I assumed it was a private office or a bedroom, so I moved on, continuing my work in the guest rooms. But I couldn't stop thinking about that door. It was the only door in the entire house that had been locked. Every other room had been open, accessible, waiting to be cleaned. But that door was sealed shut, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden behind it. I finished the second floor bedrooms and moved to the third floor, where I found the master suite. The room was enormous, larger than my entire apartment, with a four-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a palace and a balcony that overlooked the sprawling grounds. I cleaned the bathroom first, scrubbing the marble tiles and polishing the gold fixtures, and then I moved to the bedroom. I was making the bed, smoothing out the silk sheets, when I heard a loud thud from somewhere in the house. It sounded like a door slamming, followed by raised voices. I froze, listening intently, trying to figure out if I should investigate or pretend I hadn't heard anything. The voices grew louder, and I could make out two distinct tones. One was Charles Worthington's voice, calm but firm, and the other was a younger man's voice, angry and aggressive. I crept toward the doorway, my heart racing, and peered down the hallway. There, in the corridor near the locked door, stood Charles Worthington and a younger man who looked just like him. He was tall, with the same piercing blue eyes and silver hair, but his face was twisted with rage. He was screaming at Charles, his words echoing through the house. "You can't keep me out of there forever. Dad, I know what you're hiding. I know about the money." Charles stayed calm, his voice a low murmur that I couldn't quite hear, but the younger man was relentless, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "You think you can just lock it away and pretend it doesn't exist? I'm your son. I deserve what's mine." The argument went on for several more minutes, but eventually, the younger man stormed off, slamming the front door behind him. Charles stood in the hallway for a long moment, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with exhaustion. Then he straightened his suit, smoothed down his hair, and disappeared into his study. I waited a few minutes, making sure the coast was clear, before I returned to my cleaning. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just witnessed. What had the younger man meant when he said he deserved what was his? What was Charles hiding in that locked room? I told myself it wasn't my business. I was just a cleaner. I was hired to scrub floors, not to uncover secrets. But the questions gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I finished cleaning the master suite and moved to the study, Charles's private sanctuary on the second floor. The room was lined with bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they had never been opened. A massive oak desk sat in the center of the room, covered in papers and documents. Charles was nowhere to be seen, and I assumed he had left the house to deal with the aftermath of the argument. I cleaned the study as quickly as I could, dusting the shelves and vacuuming the rug, and I was about to leave when I noticed something on the floor near the desk. It was a key, a small brass key that had fallen off the desk and landed on the floor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, and I realized it was the key to the locked door at the end of the hallway. My heart began to pound. I knew I should leave it where I found it. I knew I should pretend I had never seen it. But the curiosity was overwhelming, a burning desire to know what was hidden behind that door. I told myself I was just going to take a quick look. I was just going to satisfy my curiosity and then put the key back. No one would ever know. I walked out of the study, my footsteps echoing in the silent hallway, and made my way to the locked door. The key slid into the lock perfectly, turning with a soft click that seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet house. I pushed the door open, and I stepped inside. The room was pitch black, the curtains drawn tightly shut. I fumbled for a light switch, my fingers brushing against the wall until I found it. The lights flickered on, revealing a room that took my breath away. It was an office, but unlike any office I had ever seen. The walls were covered in safes, dozens of them, floor to ceiling. Some were small, the size of shoeboxes. Others were massive, standing taller than me. In the center of the room was a single desk, a simple wooden desk with a chair behind it. On the desk sat a photograph, a picture of a woman with a bright smile and kind eyes. I recognized her instantly. It was the same woman I had seen in the photograph scattered throughout the mansion, the woman I assumed was Charles Worthington's late wife. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by safes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. What was in those safes? And why had the younger man been so desperate to get into this room? I walked over to the desk, my eyes scanning the safes. They were numbered, each one with a small tag attached. I read the tags, my heart pounding with each number I read. One said 1978. Another said 1982. Another said 1995. And the last one, the largest safe in the room, had a tag that simply said 2019. I stood in front of the 2019 safe, my hands trembling, and I reached out to touch it. The door was slightly ajar. It wasn't locked. I looked around, making sure I was still alone, and then I opened the safe. Inside were stacks of papers, binders, and photographs. I pulled out a binder, the first one I could reach, and I flipped it open. My blood ran cold. It was a ledger, a detailed ledger of payments made to a private investigator. The payments went back years, decade after decade, with notations about the subjects of the investigations. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the names, and I realized that every single person on the list was connected to Charles Worthington in some way. His business partners, his rivals, his family members. And near the bottom of the list, written in red ink, was the name of the younger man I had seen arguing with Charles. It was his son. There were notes next to his name, detailed notes about his gambling debts, his failed business ventures, his illegal dealings. I read the notes, my heart sinking with each word. The younger man had been in trouble for years, and Charles had been covering it up, bribing people, paying off debts, keeping his son's secrets buried. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found buried at the bottom of the ledger. A single page, tucked behind the others, with a date written at the top. It was the date of the younger man's birth. And next to that date was a name I didn't recognize, not Charles Worthington's name, not the name of his late wife. It was a different name, a woman's name, and she was listed as the biological mother of the younger man. I stared at the page, my mind reeling with the implications. Charles Worthington's son was not his biological son. He was adopted, or maybe he was the result of an affair. I didn't know, and I didn't care. What I knew was that I had stumbled into something far bigger than I had ever imagined. I put the binder back in the safe, closed the door, and left the room. I locked the door behind me, took the key out, and walked back to the study. I placed the key on the floor, exactly where I had found it, and I hurried out of the house. I got in my truck and drove away, my hands shaking, my heart racing, and I didn't look back. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found. I couldn't stop thinking about the ledger, the payments, the secrets. I knew I should just forget about it. I knew I should just pretend I had never seen it, but I couldn't. The truth was gnawing at me, demanding to be known. The next day, I went back to work. I was cleaning a different house, a small bungalow in a modest neighborhood, trying to put the whole thing out of my mind, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to the mansion, to the safes, to the ledger. I was scrubbing a bathroom sink when my phone rang. It was my agency, and they told me I had been requested again. Charles Worthington had called, asking specifically for me. He said he had been impressed with my work and wanted me to come back to finish the job. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to see that locked door again, but I couldn't say no. I needed the money. I gathered my supplies, drove back across the city, and parked in the same spot I had parked the day before. The luxury vehicles were still in the driveway, gleaming in the afternoon sun. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Charles opened it, and this time, his smile was different. It was thinner, more strained, as if he hadn't slept. He thanked me for coming, said he had been delighted with my work, and asked me to finish cleaning the rooms I had missed. He told me he would be in his study again, and that I could take as much time as I needed. I nodded, walked inside, and started cleaning. I worked methodically, room by room, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. But I couldn't stop thinking about the safe. I couldn't stop thinking about the ledger. And then I heard it, the sound of a door slamming, followed by the sound of raised voices. I crept down the hallway and peered around the corner. Charles was standing in the corridor again, and his son was there, pacing back and forth. They were shouting at each other, their voices echoing through the house. "You can't keep me out of that room forever!" the son screamed. "I know what you're hiding! I know about the money!" Charles stayed calm, his voice low and steady. "You don't know anything. You're just making assumptions." "You need to leave before you say something you'll regret." "I won't leave," the son shouted. "I know the truth, Dad! I know I'm not your real son! I found the adoption papers!" Charles froze. His face went pale, and the calm mask he had been wearing cracked. He looked at his son with a mixture of horror and sadness. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I found them in my mother's things," the son said. "I know everything. I know she wasn't my real mother. I know she was just a hired surrogate. I know you paid her to have me. And I know you've been hiding the truth from me my entire life." Charles stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. "It's not what you think," he said. "I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right time." "You were waiting for the right time?" The son laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I'm 45 years old, Dad. When were you going to tell me? When I was 50, 60? On my deathbed?" Charles said nothing. He just stood there, his face pale, his hands shaking. "I want to see the room," the son said. "I want to see the proof. I want to see the proof." "No," Charles said, his voice firm. "You don't want to see what's in there. Trust me." "Trust you?" The son laughed again. "You've been lying to me my entire life. Why would I trust you now?" He shoved past his father and stormed down the hallway toward the locked door. Charles tried to stop him, but it was too late. The son had already reached the door, and he was pulling at the handle, trying to force it open. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what was going to happen. I knew the door was locked, and I knew the son wouldn't be able to get in. But I also knew that Charles was about to lose control of the situation entirely. The son turned to his father, his face red with rage. "Where's the key?" he demanded. "Give me the key." "I don't have it," Charles said. "You don't have it?" the son shouted. "You're lying! You keep it on you at all times." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "Fine. If you won't give me the key, I'll just call the police. I'll tell them you're hiding something illegal in there." Charles shook his head slowly. "You don't want to do that," he said. "Trust me. You don't want to do that." "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't," the son demanded. Charles looked at his son, his eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. And then he said something I didn't expect. "Because if you call the police, they'll find out about the money you stole from my company. They'll find out about the accounts you set up in the Caymans. They'll find out about the people you've been bribing to keep your secrets hidden." The son froze. His phone dropped from his hand, clattering to the floor. "You know about that?" he whispered. "I know everything," Charles said. "I've known for years. I've been paying off your debts, covering up your mistakes, protecting you from the consequences of your own greed." The son stared at his father, his face a mask of disbelief. "You've been protecting me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "All this time?" "Yes," Charles said. "I've been protecting you, and I've been hiding the truth because I didn't want to hurt you. But I see now that the truth is the only thing that's going to save you." He walked over to the locked door and pulled a key out of his pocket. The same key I had found on the floor the day before. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing the room with the safes. "Go ahead," he said. "See for yourself." The son walked into the room, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. He looked around at the safes, his eyes wide with confusion. "What is all this?" he asked. "My father was a powerful man," Charles said, "and he had secrets." All of these men, the ones in the ledgers, they all had secrets, too. And I've been keeping them safe, protecting their families from the truth for decades. But the truth always comes out in the end. He opened the largest safe, the one marked 2019, and pulled out a folder. He handed it to his son. "This is the truth," he said. "The whole truth. About your birth, about your mother, about everything." The son opened the folder and began to read. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. He looked up at his father, his eyes filled with tears. "This can't be true," he whispered. "It's all true," Charles said. "Every word of it. Your mother was not who you thought she was, and neither was I." The son stumbled backward, his hand shaking. He dropped the folder, and the papers scattered across the floor. I could see them from where I was hiding, photographs and documents, all of them revealing a truth so dark that I couldn't look away. Charles knelt down and began to gather the papers, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I kept this from you. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" the son shouted. "From the truth? From the fact that my entire life has been a lie?" He looked down at his father, his face twisted with rage and anguish. "I hate you," he said. "I hate you for doing this to me." "I know," Charles said. "I know you do." "And I understand." The son turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. He walked out of the house, slamming the front door behind him, and Charles was left alone in the room with the safes, surrounded by the secrets of his past. I stepped out of the shadows, my heart pounding. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to see any of this. I was just cleaning." Charles looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "It's okay," he said. "It's not your fault. You just happened to be here when it all fell apart." He stood up slowly, brushing off his suit. "I need to ask you a favor," he said. "You can't tell anyone what you saw here." "Do you understand?" "Of course not," I said. "It's none of my business." He nodded, his face still pale. "Thank you. I appreciate that." He walked me to the door, and I left the mansion, my mind reeling with everything I had seen. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family, not even my agency. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed. I couldn't stop thinking about the photos and the documents scattered on the floor. The next few days were a blur. I went back to my routine, cleaning houses, trying to make ends meet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the son's face twisted with rage, Charles's voice filled with sorrow, the papers scattered across the floor. I knew I had stumbled into something far bigger than I had ever imagined. I knew I had uncovered a secret that could destroy an entire family. And I knew that I had to do something about it. I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen anything. I couldn't just go back to my life and forget about the truth. The truth was out there, and it was demanding to be known. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling the police. I thought about calling Charles and telling him I knew everything. I thought about just walking away and pretending I had never been there. But none of those options felt right. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full story before I could decide what to do. I started doing my own research. I went to the library and looked up Charles Worthington. I found articles about his business, his philanthropy, his family. He was a respected member of the community, a billionaire who had built his empire from nothing. He had been married to the same woman for 30 years, a woman who had died of cancer 5 years ago. They had one son, the same son I had seen arguing with Charles. The articles painted a picture of a perfect family, a loving father, a devoted son, a successful business. But I knew the truth. I knew about the safes, the ledger, the secrets. I knew that the perfect family was a lie. I knew that Charles had been hiding something for decades, and I knew that I was the only one who knew the truth. I decided to reach out to Charles. I found his number and called him, my hands shaking as I dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Hello," he said, his voice wary. "Mr. Worthington," I said. "It's Frank, the cleaner." There was a long pause. "Frank," he said finally, "what can I do for you?" "I need to talk to you," I said, "about what I saw, about the safes, about your son." Another long pause. "I see," he said. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." I hung up, my heart pounding. I had no idea what I was going to say to him. I had no idea what I was going to do. But I knew I had to see this through. The next morning, I drove to Charles Worthington's office. It was in a towering skyscraper in the heart of the city, a glass and steel monument to his success. I felt out of place as I walked through the lobby, surrounded by people in expensive suits and designer clothes. I told the receptionist my name, and she directed me to the private elevator. I took it to the top floor, where Charles was waiting for me. His office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. He was standing by the window, his back to me, when I walked in. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either," I admitted. But I couldn't keep it to myself. I had to know the truth. He turned around, and I saw that his eyes were red and swollen, as if he hadn't slept in days. "The truth," he said, a bitter smile crossing his face. "You want to know the truth, but I'm not sure you're ready for it." "I'm ready," I said. "I need to know." He nodded slowly and gestured for me to sit down. He took a seat across from me, his hands clasped in front of him. "It started 30 years ago," he said. "I was a young man, just starting out in business. I had met the woman of my dreams, and we were going to be married. But there was a problem. I couldn't have children. I felt my heart sink. I'm sorry," I said. "It's nothing to be sorry about," he said. "It was just the hand I was dealt. But my fiancée, she wanted children more than anything, and I loved her more than anything. So I made a decision. I decided to adopt. But the adoption wasn't straightforward," he continued. "There were complications. The birth mother was a woman I had known briefly, a woman who had been in trouble and needed money. She agreed to give up the child, but only on one condition. I had to keep the adoption secret. I had to pretend the child was my biological son, and I had to give her money regularly to keep her quiet." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "So your son isn't your biological son?" "No," he said. "He's not. But I raised him as my own. I loved him as my own. I did everything I could to give him a good life." "But you never told him the truth," I said. "You never told him he was adopted." "I was going to," he said. "I was waiting for the right time, but the right time never came. And then his mother died, and I didn't want to burden him with the truth. I thought I was protecting him." "But the secrets didn't stop there," I said. "There were other secrets, other people." Charles nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "There were other secrets. I've been keeping secrets for years, for decades, actually. My father was a powerful man, a man with connections to some very powerful people, and he had his own secrets, secrets that I inherited when he died, secrets that I've been protecting ever since." "What kind of secrets?" I asked. "The kind that could destroy people's lives," he said. "The kind that could send people to prison. The kind that could tear families apart. I inherited a legacy of secrets, and I've been carrying that weight for longer than I can remember." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine. "And now, because of you, those secrets are about to be exposed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. "My son," he said. "He's been digging. He's been looking for the truth, and he's found enough to cause a lot of damage. He knows about the safes. He knows about the money. He knows about the bribes. And he's going to use that knowledge to destroy me." "Why would he do that?" I asked. "Because he's angry," Charles said. "Because he feels betrayed. Because he wants revenge." He leaned back in his chair, his face etched with exhaustion. "I've spent my entire life trying to protect my family, and now it's all falling apart. Because of secrets. Because of lies. Because of the truth." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "But I do know one thing. I can't keep protecting my son. He has to face the consequences of his actions." The meeting ended, and I left the office feeling more confused than ever. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust. I only knew that I had stumbled into something far bigger than I had ever imagined. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Charles's son continued his investigation, digging deeper into his father's secrets. He hired his own private investigator, a man with no scruples and no loyalty. He started making demands, threatening to go public with the truth unless Charles gave him what he wanted. Charles tried to negotiate, tried to find a way to resolve the conflict peacefully, but his son was beyond reason. He wanted revenge, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it. I found myself caught in the middle of the chaos. I had seen too much, known too much. I was a witness to the truth, and that made me a target. I started receiving anonymous phone calls, threatening messages, strange cars following me home. I was terrified, but I refused to back down. Refused to let fear silence me. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a dark and stormy evening, the kind of night that makes you want to stay indoors with the lights on. I was at home, alone, trying to relax after a long day of work. My phone rang, and I saw that it was Charles's number. I answered quickly. "Frank," he said, his voice strained and urgent. "I need you to come to the mansion, right now." "It's an emergency. What's wrong?" I asked. "It's my son," he said. "He's here. He's drunk. He's threatening me. I don't know what he's going to do." "Call the police," I said. "I can't," he said. "If I call the police, everything will come out. All the secrets, all the lies, everything I've spent my life trying to protect. Please, Frank, I need you to be a witness. I need someone who knows the truth." I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should say no. I knew I should stay away, but I couldn't abandon him, not after everything I had seen. "I'll be there," I said. I drove through the storm, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road. The mansion was dark when I arrived, save for a single light in the study. I parked my truck and walked up to the front door, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The door was unlocked, and I pushed it open, stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I walked through the foyer, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and made my way to the study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of light spilling through the gap. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Charles was sitting behind his desk, his face pale, his hands trembling, and standing in front of him, swaying slightly, was his son. He was holding a gun. "Frank," Charles said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't expect you to come." "I said I would," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I had to be here." The son turned to look at me, his eyes wild and unfocused. "You," he spat. "The cleaner. You're the one who started all this. You're the one who found the key. You're the one who opened the safe. I didn't respond." I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for what would happen next. "Put the gun down," Charles said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't going to solve anything. It's going to solve everything," the son said. "When you're gone, the secrets die with you. The lies die with you. I'll finally be free." "You'll be in prison," Charles said. "Is that what you want? Is that the freedom you're looking for?" The son's hand began to shake, and I could see the indecision in his eyes. He wanted to pull the trigger. He wanted to end it all. But there was something holding him back. Maybe it was the memory of the father who had raised him. Maybe it was the realization that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. "I loved you," Charles said, his voice breaking. "I loved you from the moment I first held you. I know I made mistakes. I know I kept secrets. But everything I did because I loved you. I was trying to protect you." The son stared at his father, his eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. And then, slowly, he lowered the gun. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been so angry for so long. I don't know how to let it go." "Start by forgiving yourself," Charles said, "and then we'll work on forgiving each other." The son collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Charles walked around the desk and put his arm around his son's shoulders. I slipped out of the room, leaving them alone. I knew they had a long road ahead of them, a road filled with difficult conversations and painful revelations. But I also knew that they were finally on the right path. I walked out of the mansion, into the rain, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had done what I came to do. I had witnessed the truth, and now I was ready to move on. But the story wasn't over yet. The next morning, my phone rang again. It was Charles. "Frank," he said, his voice weary but determined. "I need to ask you for another favor. I need you to come to the police station with me. I'm going to turn myself in." I was stunned. "Turn yourself in? For what?" For the secrets, he said. For the lies. For everything I've been hiding for the past 30 years. I can't live like this anymore. I can't keep carrying this weight. I need to come clean, and I need you to be there when I do. I didn't hesitate. I'll be there, I said. The police station was a grim building, all gray concrete and fluorescent lights. I met Charles in the parking lot, and we walked in together. He approached the front desk and asked to speak to a detective. We were led to a small interview room where we sat across from a weary-looking man in a rumpled suit. Charles told him everything. He told him about the adoption, about the birth mother, about the payments he had made to keep her quiet. He told him about his father's secrets, about the safes, about the ledger. He told him about his son's embezzlement, about the bribes, about the threats. The detective listened in silence, his face unreadable. When Charles was finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "That's quite a story, Mr. Worthington," he said. "I'm going to need to verify all of this. But if what you're saying is true, then you've been harboring a criminal for years. You've been covering up crimes and obstructing justice. You could be looking at serious charges." Charles nodded slowly. "I know," he said, "but I'm ready to face whatever comes. I've been running from the truth for too long. It's time to stop." The investigation that followed was exhaustive. The police combed through Charles's records, his financial documents, his correspondence. They interviewed his son, who was now in custody, awaiting trial for his own crimes. They contacted the birth mother, who was still alive and living in a different state. She confirmed everything Charles had said. The adoption had been illegal, a black market transaction that had never been properly documented. Charles had paid her a substantial sum of money to keep quiet, and she had taken the secret to her grave until now. The police also investigated Charles's father's secrets, uncovering a web of corruption and criminal activity that stretched back decades. Charles had been protecting his father's legacy, covering up crimes committed by powerful men who had used their wealth and influence to evade justice. He had become the guardian of a dark past, a role he had never wanted but had never been able to escape. In the end, Charles was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud. He pleaded guilty and accepted a prison sentence of 5 years. His son was sentenced to 15 years for embezzlement and fraud. The trial was a media sensation, with reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every detail of the scandal. I was called as a witness, and I testified about everything I had seen and heard. The press called me the cleaner who brought down a billionaire. It was a strange feeling, being in the spotlight after so many years of invisibility. But I didn't enjoy it. I just wanted the truth to be told, and for the healing to begin. Charles served his time quietly and without complaint. He used his time in prison to write a memoir, a book that would later become a bestseller, chronicling his journey from wealth and power to redemption and humility. He donated all the proceeds to charities that supported families affected by white-collar crime. His son, meanwhile, struggled to find his way. The prison was a harsh environment, and he was often targeted by other inmates who resented his wealth and privilege. But he eventually found a mentor, an older inmate who had been in prison for 20 years and had turned his life around. With his mentor's help, he began to transform. He earned his GED, then a college degree, and eventually became a counselor for other inmates, using his own experiences to help them avoid the mistakes he had made. When Charles was released from prison, he was a changed man. The weight of the secrets had been lifted from his shoulders, and he was finally free. He moved to a small town in the countryside, far away from the glittering towers of his former empire. He bought a modest house and spent his days gardening, reading, and volunteering at the local community center. He never returned to his old life, never sought to reclaim his wealth or his power. He had found something far more valuable: peace. As for me, I continued cleaning houses, but something had changed. I saw the world differently now. I saw the secrets hiding behind closed doors, the lies lurking behind smiling faces, the darkness waiting to be uncovered. And I knew that every house I cleaned held a story, and every story had the power to change everything. I still drove my beat-up truck, still scrubbed floors for people who barely looked at me. But I no longer felt invisible. I knew now that I had the power to make a difference, to be a witness to the truth, to stand up for what was right. and I knew that no matter how small or insignificant I might seem, I could still change the world. I used to walk through life invisible, thinking no one would ever see me. Every room I cleaned, every floor I scrubbed, I faded into the walls. I never thought I'd find a truth so dark, hidden behind a locked door. I never thought my hands, so used to cleaning other people's messes, would uncover a secret that would bring a billionaire to his knees. He had built a fortress of lies, a mansion filled with shadows, but the truth was always waiting, patient and unyielding, to finally step into the light. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Charles and his son began a long and difficult journey of reconciliation. They met with therapists, lawyers, and financial advisors, trying to unravel the tangled web of secrets and lies that had been woven over 3 decades. Charles hired an accounting firm to audit his company's finances, uncovering the full extent of his son's embezzlement. The money that had been stolen over the years was tracked down, and legal proceedings were initiated. The son, facing the full weight of his actions, agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He made a deal with the prosecutors, pleading guilty to reduce charges in exchange for his testimony against others involved in the scheme. He was sentenced to prison, a harsh punishment that he accepted with a heavy heart. But the sentence came with a promise of rehabilitation, of redemption, of a chance to rebuild his life once he had served his time. Charles stood by his son throughout the entire legal process. He visited him in prison every week, bringing books and letters and words of encouragement. He wrote to the parole board, pleading for his son's early release. He used his wealth and influence to fund educational programs within the prison, programs that would give his son a path to a better future. The prison became a turning point for the son. He joined a rehabilitation program, earning his GED and then a college degree. He became a mentor to other inmates, using his own story to warn them about the dangers of greed and resentment. He wrote to his father regularly, expressing remorse and gratitude, and slowly, the wounds that had festered for so long began to heal. Charles, meanwhile, was facing his own legal battles. He had been charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud, crimes that carried significant prison time. His lawyers advised him to fight the charges, to use his wealth and influence to avoid jail. But Charles refused. He had spent his entire life running from the truth, hiding behind secrets and lies. He was done running. He stood before the judge, his head held high, and pleaded guilty to all charges. His voice was steady, his eyes clear, as he spoke about his decades of deception. He spoke about his father, a powerful man who had used his wealth to evade justice. He spoke about his own complicity, his willingness to protect his father's legacy at the expense of the truth. He spoke about his son, a young man who had been corrupted by greed and resentment, who had been led down a dark path by the secrets that had poisoned their family. And he apologized. He apologized to the victims of his father's crimes, to the families who had been torn apart by the secrets he had kept. He apologized to his son for the years of lies and manipulation, for the pain he had caused. He apologized to the public for his arrogance and his greed, for the example he had set for others. The courtroom was silent as he spoke, and when he was finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. The judge sentenced Charles to 5 years in prison, a sentence that was both just and merciful. Charles accepted it without complaint, and he was led away in handcuffs, his head still held high. The media coverage was relentless, with reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every detail of the scandal. The story was a sensation, a tale of wealth and power, of secrets and lies, of redemption and forgiveness. But I refused to speak to the press. I had seen enough of the spotlight during the trial, and I had no desire to be dragged back into the drama. I just wanted the truth to be told, and for the healing to begin. Charles's time in prison was transformative. He had spent his entire life surrounded by luxury, insulated from the harsh realities of the world. But in prison, he was stripped of everything. His wealth, his status, his power, all of it was gone, and he was left with nothing but himself. He was forced to confront the choices he had made, the secrets he had kept, the lies he had told. It was a painful process, a slow and difficult reckoning with his past, but it was also a liberating one. For the first time in his life, he was free. He was no longer bound by the weight of his father's legacy, no longer trapped by the secrets that had defined his existence. He was just a man, flawed and imperfect, trying to find his way. He started writing in prison, keeping a journal of his thoughts and experiences. He wrote about his childhood, about the father who had been so distant and demanding. He wrote about his marriage, the woman he had loved and lost. He wrote about his son, the boy he had raised, and the man he had become. And he wrote about the secrets, the lies, the web of deception that had consumed his life. The journal became a catharsis, a way for him to process the pain and guilt that had haunted him for so long. He also started counseling other inmates, using his own story to help them find their own paths to redemption. He became a mentor to a young man who had been sentenced for drug trafficking, a young man who was angry and lost and full of resentment. Charles recognized something of himself in that young man, the same rage, the same sense of entitlement, the same refusal to accept responsibility for his actions. He spent hours talking to him, sharing his own experiences, trying to help him see that there was a better way. It wasn't easy, and there were many setbacks. But slowly, the young man began to change. He started taking his rehabilitation seriously, working toward his GED, preparing for life after prison. And when he was released, he wrote to Charles, thanking him for his guidance and for helping him find a better path. Charles's son, meanwhile, was undergoing his own transformation. The prison was a harsh environment, and he was often targeted by other inmates who resented his wealth and privilege. He was beaten, humiliated, stripped of the arrogance that had defined his adult life. But he refused to give up. He refused to let the darkness consume him. He joined the same rehabilitation program that his father had helped fund, earning his GED and then a college degree. He became a counselor to other inmates, using his own experiences to help them avoid the mistakes he had made. He wrote to his father regularly, expressing remorse and gratitude, and slowly, the wounds that had festered for so long began to heal. The letters were not always easy to read. There were moments of anger, of resentment, of pain, but there were also moments of grace, of forgiveness, of hope. And as the years passed, the letters became more frequent, more honest, more filled with love. They were rebuilding their relationship, brick by brick, word by word, and it was beautiful to witness. I visited Charles in prison a few times. He looked older, thinner, his silver hair now streaked with white. But there was a peace in his eyes that I had never seen before. He told me about his journal, about the counseling, about the young man he had mentored. He told me about his son, about the letters, about the slow and painful process of reconciliation. And he thanked me. He thanked me for finding the key, for opening the safe, for bringing the truth to light. He said that without me, he would still be trapped in the web of secrets and lies. He would still be carrying the weight of his father's legacy, suffocating under the pressure of his own deception. He would still be a prisoner, even as he walked free. I told him that I didn't deserve the credit. I was just a cleaner, a man who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. But he shook his head and told me I was wrong. He told me that sometimes the most invisible people are the ones who make the biggest difference. And he told me to never forget that. When Charles was released from prison, he was a changed man. The weight of the secrets had been lifted from his shoulders, and he was finally free. He moved to a small town in the countryside, far away from the glittering towers of his former empire. He bought a modest house and spent his days gardening, reading, and volunteering at the local community center. He never returned to his old life, never sought to reclaim his wealth or his power. He had found something far more valuable: peace. His son, too, was released from prison a few years later. He had served his time, completed his rehabilitation, and was ready to start a new life. He moved to a different state where no one knew his name or his past. He got a job at a nonprofit organization, helping young people who had been caught up in the criminal justice system. He married a kind woman who knew his history and loved him anyway. And he started a family, determined to build a legacy that was worthy of the sacrifices his father had made. The mansion, the scene of so much pain and deception, sat empty for years. The safes were removed, the secrets finally laid to rest. The house was eventually sold to a young couple who had no idea about its history. They renovated it, painting over the dark walls, replacing the heavy oak doors with something lighter and brighter. They filled the rooms with laughter and joy, and the mansion became a home again. Charles visited the house once, shortly before it was sold. He walked through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. He stood in front of the room where the safes had been, the room that had held so many secrets, and he smiled. He had left the darkness behind. He had found his way into the light. He continued cleaning houses, but something had changed. I saw the world differently now. I saw the secrets hiding behind closed doors, the lies lurking behind smiling faces, the darkness waiting to be uncovered. And I knew that every house I cleaned held a story, and every story had the power to change everything. I still drove my beat-up truck, still scrubbed floors for people who barely looked at me, but I no longer felt invisible. I knew now that I had the power to make a difference, to be a witness to the truth, to stand up for what was right. And I knew that no matter how small or insignificant I might seem, I could still change the world. I kept in touch with Charles and his son over the years. We would meet for coffee or lunch, and we would talk about our lives. Charles always asked about my work, always listened with genuine interest as I told him about the houses I was cleaning, the people I was working for. He was never condescending, never dismissive. He treated me as an equal, as a friend, and I treasured that. He told me once that I had taught him a valuable lesson. He said that true power is not about wealth or status. It is about integrity, about honesty, about the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. He said that I had shown him that anyone, regardless of their station in life, can make a difference. And he said that he would be forever grateful. Years passed, and the memories of that day in the mansion faded. Charles passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his books and his garden. His son attended the funeral, his eyes red with tears, his heart filled with gratitude. He spoke at the service, telling stories about his father, the man who had taught him so much, the man who had never given up on him, the man who had shown him the true meaning of redemption. He said that his father had been a flawed man, a man who had made many mistakes, but he had also been a good man, a man who had tried to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. He said that he would spend the rest of his life honoring his father's legacy, living a life of honesty and integrity. I stood at the back of the chapel, watching the service. I had dressed in my best clothes, the only suit I owned, and I felt out of place among the wealthy mourners. But I didn't care. I was there to honor my friend, the man who had taught me so much about courage and redemption. When the service was over, I walked up to Charles's son and offered my condolences. He hugged me tightly, and I felt the warmth of his embrace. "Thank you, Frank," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything. If it hadn't been for you, none of this would have happened. We would still be trapped in the darkness, and my father would have died without ever finding the peace he deserved." I shook my head and told him that the credit was not mine. I had just been a witness to the truth, a small part of a much larger story. He smiled and said that sometimes the smallest parts are the most important. I drove home from the funeral, my mind filled with memories. I thought about the day I had first walked into that mansion, nervous and uncertain, not knowing what I would find. I thought about the key, the safe, the ledger. I thought about the secrets and the lies, the pain and the redemption. And I thought about Charles, the man who had taught me that it is never too late to change, never too late to find forgiveness, never too late to start over. I pulled into my driveway, parked my truck, and walked into my modest house. It was small and humble, a far cry from the mansion where I had worked all those years ago. But it was mine, and it was filled with something far more valuable than wealth. It was filled with peace. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten so many meals alone, and I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. I thought about the years I had spent cleaning other people's houses, scrubbing their floors, polishing their fixtures. I had always felt invisible, insignificant, like nothing I did really mattered. But I had been wrong. I had found the key. I had opened the safe. I had uncovered the truth. And in doing so, I had helped a broken family find their way back to each other. I used to walk through life invisible, thinking no one would ever see me. Every room I cleaned, every floor I scrubbed, I faded into the walls. I never thought I'd find a truth so dark, hidden behind a locked door. I never thought my hands, so used to cleaning other people's messes, would uncover a secret that would bring a billionaire to his knees. He had built a fortress of lies, a mansion filled with shadows, but the truth was always waiting, patient and unyielding, to finally step into the light. I am the one who found it, the one who held the key, the one who saw the truth when no one else could see. I carried the weight of that secret, the burden of that knowledge, and I knew that I had to set it free. Forgiving doesn't mean you let the darkness stay. It means you shine a light and watch it all burn away. I am stronger than the secrets I uncovered in the dark. I am braver than the fear that tried to silence my heart. I carry truth inside my soul, a fire that won't die down. I found the hidden pieces, and I finally took control. The world may try to bury the truth beneath the lies we tell, but the light will always find a way, breaking through the shell. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly. I am not defined by fear. I am defined by what I chose to see. The story of the mansion, the safes, and the secrets is now part of history, but its lessons live on in the lives of everyone it touched. Charles found his peace, his son found his redemption, and I found my purpose. I learned that sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest consequences. A misplaced key, a moment of curiosity, a decision to tell the truth. These are the things that change the world. These are the things that set us free. I still clean houses for a living. I still scrub toilets and mop floors for people who barely look at me. But I see the world differently now. I see the secrets hiding behind closed doors, the lies lurking behind smiling faces, the darkness waiting to be uncovered. And I know that every house I clean holds a story, and every story has the power to change everything. A lone wolf might lose his mate, but he never loses his teeth. And that day, in that mansion, I found out exactly what happened when you uncovered a secret that someone had been hiding for 30 years. I think about that day often, and I still wonder what would have happened if I had just ignored the key, if I had just pretended I hadn't seen it. Would the truth have ever come out? Or would the secrets have stayed locked away forever, buried beneath layers of money and power and privilege? I don't know the answer, and I'll probably never know. But I do know that sometimes the smallest decisions lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes the most invisible people have the power to bring down the most powerful. And sometimes the truth, no matter how dark or painful, is the only thing that can set us free.